Brilliant. I think let's get things started for those who are here already. Lovely to see lots of familiar names. I'm sure we'll have other people popping in over the next 45 minutes or so. For those I haven't met before, my name is Nick. I'm the founder of CoTeam. And it's my absolute pleasure to be bringing another one of these fantastic sort of live thought-provoking sessions to you. And today I'm joined by the formidable, I'll let him introduce himself properly in a moment, Shuvo Saha. We go way back working together through many different ventures as part of his time at the Google Digital Academy, but really tackling something a little bit left field for us today. As you know, CoTeam very much based on the principles of team effectiveness and well-being, and sort of understand your role and how to accelerate for team performance. But sustainability, not something that we typically we have authority to speak about. And what I'm most interested in, having spoken with Shuvo on several occasions, is sort of the human aspect of sustainability. I know we've got people joining us sitting in a wide variety of sort of HR type roles in the call today, but really thinking about, particularly as sustainability is another huge transformational trend, much like the one we've just been through with digital. How is this going to impact the workforce? And what should companies be doing in terms of employee retention and engagement around this very, very important topic? So I'm not going to talk too much. I'm actually going to hand straight over to Shuvo, who can officially introduce himself. Shuvo.
Thank you, Nick. And yeah, very nice to see you, at least one or two familiar names as well. Thanks for having me. And the title of this session, as Nick says, is Sustainability, the New Digital, but a bit about me before diving into that. So yeah, I'm Shuvo. As Nick says, we met during my time at Google. I spent 15 years there and set up something called the Google Digital Academy, which was Google's education and transformation program for their largest customers across EMEA. And while I was there and building out that program, obviously I was deep involved with digital transformation and the way in which we tackle the human dimensions of that. But also I was introduced to a company called Kite Insights while there, and they were launching or conceiving of something called the Climate School, which was an education and transformation program for companies making the shift to being carbon neutral, net zero, and preparing themselves for a sustainable future. It's not something which I had a lot of experience with at the time, but happily joined their advisory board. And then a couple of years later, actually made the leap to leave Google and join Kite. And I'm now Chief Product and Growth Officer at Kite Insights. And my job is to define the Climate School, figure out what it is, how we partner around it, the content that we build, the education and transformation programs that we build, and yeah, have effectively made the leap from the world of digital to the world of sustainable transformation. Got chatting to Nick about this a few weeks ago, and we found that there were some fascinating parallels, in particular, the fact that both are human-centric challenges. So that's why I'm here, I think, today, to kind of tell a little bit more of that story. I think I'll focus in on the Kite story and the Climate School initially, but I think along the way we'll probably grapple with some questions about the parallels with digital transformation and the human challenges at the heart. I hope that's about right, Nick.
Yeah, that sounds spot on. And I think, like Shuvo said, when we first got talking about this, my head started spinning with ideas, because I think digital was very much a zeitgeist for many years within organizations. And Shuvo, I think there's one particular thing you said to me. You said sustainability is like the internet in 1999. And I think, you know, I do find a fascinating topic to think about. We are very much on the tip of the iceberg with how much this is going to transform businesses. So I had loads of questions for Shuvo. And in fact, we're running live Q&A here. So if you click the Q&A button at the bottom, if you have a question at any point, feel free to interject and ask that question in the chat. Then we'll pick those up as we go, rather than trying to save them for the end. Shuvo, take us through a little bit about the Kite School and what brought you to do this.
Perfect. So here's the story as it currently stands. I'll explain a little bit about the Climate School, what it's about, and hopefully we'll see some of these parallels in the human challenges with digital along the way. So our mission at Kite is to equip every employee to play their part in the climate crisis and enable businesses to thrive in the green economy. It's clearly something that is affecting pretty much every business and therefore every employee in one form or another. However, there is this problem. Those of you who are keeping abreast of the state of play with climate and sustainability may have read or heard about the IPCC reports, which regularly update the world on the latest understanding of the environment. And in the last one, it was clear that the world has to take action on climate now. Achieving net zero, however, and you'll hear lots of talk about going to net zero, carbon neutral, it's not just a case of shifting to sort of renewable energy and looking at whatever it is, solar and wind or that sort of thing. There's actually behind this a radical transformation of pretty much every aspect of the company. So whether you're in procurement, looking at low carbon suppliers, or finance, thinking about climate risk-based criteria for capital, or R&D with low carbon designs, or HR, thinking about how do I mobilize employees, or marketing, engaging customers with net zero lives, basically across the entire value chain, companies really have to think about what has to change. How do you apply circular economy principles? There's another phrase that you may have heard of a lot recently. In other words, everything's about to change. And that is why Nick and I have just been talking about this being a similar level of profound change as the internet and digital. It really is going to change a lot about how companies work, and even how they set their missions, their purpose, and all that. However,
sorry, Shuvo, we actually just had a question in the chat specifically around that. Does sustainability differ from digital when we consider them both transformational trends?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good point. And I think that there are lots and lots of similarities between the two. I spent, as Nick said before, both my time at Google and prior to that in consulting and even as a marketeer at P&G way back. The internet and digital was this profound shift, which was changing, yes, the technologies. So there's definitely a similarity there. There are new technologies which are creating opportunities for change and innovation. That's common. There are other things which are similar, like typically digital used to be something that was dealt with, one expert in the company. There was the head of digital, or there was the head of interactive marketing. And that person had to be the person who knew everything and was probably doing that particular discipline. Sustainability is very similar. There are sort of the people who are in either chief sustainability officer roles, or there are CSR roles, for instance, that are typically seen to be the expert in the company, and they have to worry about the reporting and the technicalities of it. But similar to digital, what's now also happening is that those roles are starting to move from being expert roles or compliance roles, and they're shifting to become change management roles. They're shifting to have to look at the entire organization and what needs to change in almost every department, which is a massive shift for those roles. So that's a lot of the similarities. The biggest differences, though, what we're seeing is, first of all, the stakes are much higher, right? So, we're talking here about a planetary level crisis. We're talking here about, the future of the world and the next generation, and these types of issues. So it's really profound. And because of that, there is, and actually I should say that as a result of that, there's lots of human dimensions to this as well. Things like climate intersect with issues like equality, issues like gender, issues like health. So there's real sort of meaningful human consequences of the challenge that we're tackling here. And as a result, there is a depth of feeling about this amongst the general population. And, it's no surprise that this type of issue has created the kind of climate action that you see going on around us. There are marches and there are protests and there are people on the street talking about this. I'm not sure that there was quite the same fervor and desire to take action politically as we see around climate. And as a result, you also have employee groups rising up, with the same sort of activist mindset within organizations. Google had it, for instance. There was the Greenvillers group and the Anthropocene group, and there are various different groups in Google and many other companies, and creating a sort of grassroots movement demanding change in the same way as you see these sort of protests on the street. So it's, there's definitely a lot of passion for this subject and a kind of latent energy that can be tapped into and desire to act at a far greater level than I ever saw with interest in the internet.
I think that's, I mean, we were ones out championing on the streets about digital maybe, but no, it certainly wasn't the movement that you're seeing with the climate crisis.
Yeah. So as it says at the bottom here, there's few companies though that are transforming their organizations at the pace or scale needed. So it's a massive shift, but frankly, things are not moving fast enough. That said, this isn't just about doing the right thing for the planet and for the environment, because this is also a business opportunity. A great quote from Mark Carney, who is now the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action, used to run Bank of England. Businesses that fail to adapt to climate change will go bust, but those that put green at the center of their strategy will profit significantly. And this is, I think, similar to the digital revolution. Any company that was not getting on board with the use of the internet and using digital as a competitive advantage, if you like, would be left behind. And similarly, climate transformation, if you like, we expect will be a source of competitive advantage in the coming years. Whether it's to do with the impact that has on employees or your customers or your investors, there are so many different stakeholders for whom this is going to be important. And this is brought to life in the data. So this is some Kite data from one of our research pieces not so long ago, and surveying about 800 employees across the UK and France. We found that 76% of employees were ready to take action in the context of their work, irrespective of seniority, gender, or function. In fact, 12% would consider moving job to have an impact on climate. So they would care so much that they would actually shift jobs or move careers because it really matters to them. So massive appetite for action. However, there's this flip side. 67% said that they did not feel that they had the tools to take action. Only 7% of board members were feeling climate competent. So there's a gap between the sort of intent and the desire to act versus people's knowledge and their ability to act. And it's into that gap that we clearly need to do something.
There's some quite alarming facts here, actually, Shuvo. So that 12% is one that really jumps out at me. I mean, it basically means you could lose a tenth of your workforce like that if you don't consider your climate policies. And a question has just come through specifically from someone in the group that is asking what the role of HR is in this. We've got a mix of people here sitting in sustainability roles, but also in more broad sort of human resource roles. What should HR be taking away from this?
No, it's a really, really good question, because this is a people challenge at the heart of it. And if I was in the shoes of an HR director right now, I'd certainly be thinking about things like employee attraction and retention. So the younger generation clearly cares about this issue very, very deeply. They're the ones that have been out protesting, and they care about the sustainability credentials of any organization that they are talking to, and they want to see that organizations have integrity, and that they are, they care about this and that they're doing something about it. So that's part of the proposition for the company itself, the employer brand, if you like, that new recruits are signing up to. Then you've got, if that's attraction rather, then thinking about retention. Yes, there are employees who aren't moving jobs. You are starting to see people who are trying to create opportunities for themselves. I've seen people at Google, for instance, create new roles for themselves which are related to this topic. And we're going to see that happen more and more. I would expect that over time, in much the same way that we saw the rise of digital skills, we're going to see the rise of the need for greater knowledge experience and skills in sustainability more broadly. That's becoming a really demanded knowledge set and skill set in the market. So I think HR directors are going to have to think about how are they equipping their employees to build those skills, either to buy them in, find the right people to build those skill sets and those knowledge sets internally. So I think that's going to become important. And actually, if you leap forward a few years and you to imagine, what the future of an HR director could look like, it might be that, entire departments will be held accountable for their carbon footprint, for instance. That might become part of the performance factors that we might be seeing in the future. It might be that individuals who run departments will be held accountable for that kind of their sustainability performance in the same way as that they're being held account for their business performance. And there's real implications for incentives there as well in the future. I don't think that we're not quite there yet, but it's entirely possible that we head in that direction.
Mm. Yeah, very interesting space to watch. Like you said, we saw with digital, this sort of companies would start investing in an innovation unit. They would be the ones that would do digital, and everyone else got on with the BAU stuff. Yeah. Maybe that's happening a little bit with sustainability now as well. It's like, well, we don't do the sustainability. There's someone or a team that does that. We're just focusing on running the business, but actually the melding of those two.
Exactly. And I think that's very much the case at the moment. And when I said to you in our first chat that sustainability feels like digital marketing or the internet in 1999, I mean, for most employees right now in most departments, they are probably just continuing with their jobs as if nothing's happened, or as there's no significant obvious shift to their roles or to their function or that sort of thing. But as we saw in the earlier slide, actually so many things will indeed need to shift and change over time. So I would expect that in the same way as we saw digital technology affect almost every role in every company, we will see something similar playing out in the coming years.
Interesting space.
So it's into that gap between intent and actual action that we're bringing and launching the Kite Climate School. So this is a program that is about activating employees' head, heart, and hands. So we talk about these three things because if the head is about knowledge, the heart is about conscience and commitment, and the hands is about agency and ability to take action. All three are really important. 2 out of 3 is not enough. Even if you have the knowledge, even if you have desire and commitment, unless you feel able to act and you feel like you have agency and support from management to change things in your company, then nothing will change. Even if you have the heart and you have support from management, but actually don't really understand the facts of what are the problems that need solving, what's actually happening in the environment, how does that relate to human issues, how does that relate to the business and the industry that you're part of, you won't know how to take action. So it's really important to have all three of these, the head, the heart, and the hands, because without that, the change won't happen. And without that, it's not possible to kind of reach the transformation that would be required to meet the climate and planetary challenges that we're working on today. So if you think about these three things, the head, the heart, and the hands, and how does this actually play out in a real organization? And I just thought I'd share sort of a little mental model, if you like, as to what happens in companies today and what we hope could happen in the future. So here's a typical change problem. It could be sustainability. Frankly, this could be almost any big change challenge or transformation challenge. The patterns are similar. There's usually some kind of a top-down change plan, and many companies today have a sustainability strategy. They'll have some pillars. They'll talk about energy. They'll talk about water. They'll talk about circular economy or waste, or various other things that the company wants to act on. And that will probably be set by someone like the Chief Sustainability Officer, and it'll be discussed top-down. And also, this is the sort of thing that will be reported to their stakeholders and to their investors. But at the other end of the scale, you have at the bottom all sorts of different initiatives. And, we talked about these grassroots employee groups. I talked about the green grows at Google, and there are other equivalents all over. And there's all manner of different sustainability initiatives that might be going on. Everything from, we should cycle to work, or let's have meat-free Monday, or whatever it might be, in specific offices. And there'll be champions who are doing that. However, the challenge on the right-hand side is, champions are scattered, efforts are often disconnected, and there's a lack of common language and understanding that joins all of this up. And unfortunately, that means that it's hard for change to happen faster. So your ideal is where actually all of this does join up, and it looks a little bit more like this. And this is where, if we can address the head, heart, and hands from the top to the bottom of an organization, that provides, from a head point of view, a common understanding of all the external forces that the company is trying to respond to, and the internal plans that can help to respond to that. It creates a common purpose at the heart level and the desire to act. And if you think about the hands, this is all about taking action with common objectives, top to bottom, practical tools, practical resources, which are all lined up. It's basically about getting fewer, bigger, better initiatives where employees can line up against a common set of plans, which means that the whole organization can have greater impact together than they could have had when their efforts are sort of fragmented. And this, again, is where I think HR can have a major role to play in terms of figuring out how to put in place the kind of infrastructure, the communication, the thinking and the culture that enables employees to be able to line up against this, alongside HR, working alongside the likes of sustainability teams. But also, it is a multifunctional thing. It has to be worked across all different functions in the organization. So ultimately, this is a board level, a CEO level conversation.
There's a couple of good questions coming through here, actually. The first one is just how to get people to buy in on the change. It can be quite challenging to connect these big movements to their day-to-day jobs. I think this mental model actually does a really good job of sort of bringing that to life. I don't know if you've got any sort of practical guidance or things that you've seen with clients that you're working with that can really help accelerate that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that there are too many organizations yet that have cracked this. And as I say, it's early days. It's like the internet in '99. That said, we were having a conversation just this week, actually, this last week, with one of the large kind of electrical and industrial companies that we're working with. And we came out at the end of the meeting talking about how it's important to almost reset the vision for a particular function in an organization, that the functional leaders need to think through, whether you're in finance or marketing or sales or production or whatever it is, that actually looking at the vision for your function through this lens of addressing the climate crisis, through this lens of what does it mean to move to a more sustainable organization and a sustainable future. If you put that lens on the work that you do, and then ask yourself, well, what does the future of my function look like? A bit like the example I was giving earlier about what does the HR director of the future have to do? What kind of incentives might they have to think about? Almost every single function in an organization will have to do the same thing. And for this picture on the screen to come true, you'd have to have, if each one of these arrows was a functional set of initiatives or projects, if you like, someone there will have to set a vision. So I think that becomes really important in the coming years.
And Daniel's also got a sort of a question here that relates a little bit back to that, but how do we actually ensure that this goes deeper than just CSR initiatives, or that term that gets used a lot of greenwashing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really good point. And I think for a long time, CSR has been sort of in the corner of an organization as like the doing good department, while the business carries on doing whatever it does. And I think that as a result, the initiatives that have come from those types of departments, they're sort of perhaps not taken seriously enough. And it's not really sort of considered as something that would be embedded throughout an organization. It's, we have this big business over here, we do some nice things in there. But I think that coming back to this point about vision and the leadership narrative, I think it's really important that everybody in the organization can start to see how their particular role, their team, their department can be part of a greater change. There's a piece of storytelling, I think, which is really important there. Individuals and humans respond to stories, they respond to visions, they respond to being able to make a connection between something that is greater than themselves, but also, a way in which they can make a contribution. There's something quite human there that needs to happen. One of the other organizations that we're working with in the construction industry, for instance, they have a global initiative, a global change initiative, which is led by the CEO down. And there is a narrative in that organization about a transformational shift that the whole company has to go through. The climate crisis is almost existential for them. They happen to be in cement, which is an incredibly highly emitting industry in terms of CO2. So, you might argue that we shouldn't even have cement in the future, that we should have other building materials, and concrete needs to exist in other ways. So for an organization like that, they have to think really deeply about the future of their whole company, the impact that they have as an organization on the world, and be able to share a narrative with their teams about the future that they want to create together. So it's quite it's a big story that needs to be led from the top. And if that story can be engaging and it can be told so that each team, each department, even each employee can see themselves as part of that story, that can be really compelling, and actually something that I think employees can feel proud to be part of an organization that is genuinely, as it were, putting their money where their mouth is to make a change for good.
Cool. We also have another example coming up from one of your other clients in the tech sector. So we'll take a look at that soon with some numbers around some of the initiatives that they're driving through this model as well. So brilliant. And one last little quick question here, maybe a simple answer. Do you think this is going to be a major part of attracting millennial and Gen Z talent? Maybe going back a couple of slides on this. Do you see this as, the best employers of the future are going to really have this plan in place?
Well, I think it's been discussed a lot recently. Lots has been said about millennials, Gen Z needing purpose, looking for work and organizations that are somehow meaningful. And you also see that playing out in the way that the younger generation has clearly been engaging with climate, sustainability, and all of these types of issues. So appealing to the next generation of employees this is going to be fundamental, I think. And I do believe it will make a big difference. And I think we're already hearing this if you talk to kind of younger employees in larger organizations that have been attracted into companies that do have credentials on sustainability, that was part of the type of thing that drew them in. So I suspect that having a really good plan and a culture and a vision and putting, as I say, putting your money where your mouth is as a company around this issue becomes really important to pull in talent. And I suspect that the top talent will start to go to organizations that, yes, are high performing from a business point of view, but are also high performing on what is often called the triple bottom line these days: profit, planet, and people. So if an organization is looking at all of those things, then I think that's where the talent will tend to go towards.
Brilliant. Thank you for answering. Keep the questions coming in, guys, as well as we continue to move through.
So I thought I'd just explain a little bit more about how the climate score specifically works, and I've sort of walked you through the concept of you might think about this as a transformation toolkit. So it starts with an evaluate phase, moves on to an educate phase, then goes into activate, and then to advocate. So walking through each of these, so evaluate is all about starting to understand where employees are at to begin with. So how engaged are they with climate sustainability? We look at their head, their heart, and their hand, their knowledge, their commitment, their sense of agency and action. And based on that assessment, it's survey-based methodology, it's then possible to get a read as to where employees are, how that differs by level, by function, by geography. In large organizations, you'll see differences according to different roles, etc. But that enables us to be able to do a sort of segmentation of the employee base. And you see a little thumbnail of that on the left-hand side. Some people are champions who know a lot and care a lot. There are others who might be enthusiasts who perhaps care a lot, but they don't know that much yet, and so on. And there's always some bystanders and resistors who think that this whole issue is something that they don't need to care about, and they don't care to learn about it either. But it's important to understand where your employees are at. Having done that diagnostic, it's then more possible to then sort of recommend or prescribe the right kind of learning interventions and tailor a curriculum based on the company's needs. So then moving into an education phase, bringing learning content both at scale through kind of e-learning modules, as well as depth with masterclasses, workshops, and smaller group things where we bring teams together to think about the changes that they can drive together. We need to talk about some of the climate science so they understand what the issues are, but also the implications on business roles. And there's a whole range of challenges that must be understood: environmental, social, economic challenges, solutions to those challenges, actions that businesses should take to bring those solutions to bear, and enablers as well that accelerate the shift. So things like finance and governance and policy, and how that plays into this as well. So there's lots to learn. And it's important to be able to do this right from the top to the bottom of the organization. And hence, it's good to have a blend of formats that can go kind of deep with a few, but also scaled for many. So that's the education piece. Hopefully, employees from top to bottom emerge from that with ideas for change. What can I do differently in my company? What can I do differently in my function, in my department, in my team? And those ideas need a place to go. So that's the thinking behind the activate phase. It's about taking ideas, funneling them, prioritizing them, helping organizations to prioritize those, which are the ones that can have greatest impact and scale, which are the ideas that best fit with that top-down sustainability plan, facilitating for some of those ideas to turn into real projects, and then connecting, in some cases, connecting projects with startup green tech companies that can support with new technologies where required. So there's a whole piece there around activation, which becomes effectively like an innovation pipeline, if you like. And it could be innovation in tech, it could be innovation in process, it could be innovation in ways of working, it could be innovation in the way that companies look at their supply chain or what they do with their suppliers up the chain or their customers down the chain, all sorts. So if we call them innovation projects, if you like, hopefully those innovation projects are successful. And if they are successful, then you don't want for that success to be limited to the four walls of the company. Because ultimately the change that needs to happen is not about just one company change, it's actually about change at industry level, or is it change at ecosystem level? And anyone in the space will talk a lot about the importance of systems change and the fact that no one company can drive change on their own, but actually it needs to be a combination of many companies working together with government and civil society, and there's a whole ecosystem there that needs to move together. So that's why we also have an advocate phase, which is all about bringing the thought leaders and the champions from different companies together, creating industry events, creating coalitions, having opportunities where employees and champions can share their stories of success and hopefully share best practice and help others to accelerate change at greater level before. And this links back to the earlier question about what's the difference between digital and sustainability. I think sustainability in particular, it's really critical that change happens beyond the four walls of the company. It has to be something that organizations are collaborating together on, building partnerships, sharing best practice, accelerating transformation faster by helping one another and thinking about how they can achieve things better together than they could have done apart. And given the timelines of needing to halve carbon emissions by 2030 and get to sort of worldwide ambition to get to carbon neutral by 2050, these are big challenges to try to address, and that really needs advocacy and working beyond the four walls of the company.
We have another question here, Shuvo, and I think this model, in particular, this way of thinking, anyone who's worked in digital or sort of understands that test and learn loop, like you need to try and move around it as fast as you can and keep moving. You don't stop, right? So there's constant evaluation, and we'll talk about the evaluate stage in a moment. We have a question here from Hamish. How does the combination of educational and empowerment alter throughout the school's process to facilitate intrinsically motivated long-term behavioral change in the workforce? So just a little bit around that idea of not only educating people, but also empowering people to drive change.
Yeah, completely. So there is a layer to this where we talk about the behaviors which are required to help people show up in a way that drives transformation and change. There's actually some really great work that's been done by a range of organizations who are in the space of behavioral change, psychology, and that sort of thing. And it's looking at the behaviors required to drive the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. This initiative, I think it's got like 1,000 organizations now, including ourselves, who are involved. It's called the Inner Development Goals, or the IDGs. And it has 5 different components to it, which is, let's see if I can get this right off the top of my head. There's being, which is about how you relate to yourself. There is relating, which is about how you care for others. There's collaborating, which is about sort of social skills and interacting and making things happen in groups. There's a piece on acting, which is about how you sort of drive change and create momentum with groups of people. There's one more missing. Thinking, which is about sort of problem solving, visioning, and the way in which you sort of can sort of do sense making in kind of complex, ambiguous environments. So all of those different 5 dimensions are important to bring to life for this change to happen. In some ways, you could argue that's the most important bit. Because even though I talked about these, the challenges, the environmental, social, and economic challenges, the solutions to those challenges, the enablers and the actions that they can take, that's all at a level of kind of knowledge and skill, if you like. But for all of that to be sort of deployed well, requires this sort of mindset shift as well. And especially in this advocate phase, it's not that common for organizations to start working with one another, because most markets economically tend to be competitive. That's sort of the way it tends to work. And actually, we're talking about something which sort of goes beyond market competition to something where, yes, you can have an advantage in this market, but at the same time, we're ultimately all working against a common goal. So, and that requires certain mindsets, which is why I think these IDGs and anything that we can do to bring those behaviors to life. And we're trying to bake that into the climate school as well. So there's this sort of behavioral dimension to it as well. So yes, I suppose is the short answer. It's really important, and change won't happen without it.
Brilliant. Let's talk a little bit just about this evaluation stage, because I think, again, for many people, this is really the first step in the journey of, where are we at? And I think you've got some real data here from a client you've been working with, which would be very interesting to go through. Yeah,
absolutely. So sorry, this slide's a little bit dense, and I'll skip past this piece as well to talk about the the type of analysis that we would do at the evaluate stage. So this is an example of a company in the tech space which was reviewing and assessing a sample of their employees, and you can see some results here in terms of their heart, their head, and their hands. And I should say the caveat to all of this is this particular sample and these types of results were a group who were already quite engaged with sustainability. So there's quite a few sort of internal sustainability champions within this group, more than the average for sure. So hopefully this gives you a flavor of it. So you can see some heart scores here, where this particular group extremely engaged with environmental challenges. 50% were champions, which means that they know a good amount about the challenges and they care deeply about them, as per the sort of the head and the heart axes that you see here. This engaged group said 94% it was important to their motivation, 40% said that they had considered moving jobs. So, I mean, compared to the 12% that we saw earlier, which was more than average, this particular group's super engaged. However, interestingly, even though there's a lot of desire and commitment, when you look at their head, there are still important gaps in their knowledge. There's still quite a few people that lack confidence in their knowledge about climate environmental issues. And even when they correctly answer the question, like, you know, understanding the issues around carbon or temperature rises or these types of things, but they weren't necessarily confident in that knowledge. And so in this case, you know, a large proportion were either uninformed or not confident. And in particular, they were less aware of the societal implications as well. And, you know, I talked earlier about the fact that something like climate has an immediate knock-on effect with quite human issues like equality or gender or health or these types of things. But lots of people still see it as a little bit of a scientific topic that is to do with carbon dioxide and temperature rises and melting glaciers and that sort of thing, whereas actually there's very human and very much more meaningful, at least to the average person, so very human consequences of this and societal consequences that lots of people aren't fully aware of yet. And also there were poor scores for distinguishing between the company's commitments and their achievements. So, you know, lots of employees are sitting there going, oh, you know, I've seen my company make some announcements and they know that there is something going on, but they're not really sure about what's been committed to, what's been achieved, and how they can help. And then if you look at the hands side, what are they saying about to what extent they can act or want to act? And in this particular case study, as you can see, you've got people who are really willing to act. They feel able to take action. The stats here, 97% really willing to take action, 60% agree they have some knowledge and can start working on environmental projects. However, they all expected to see even more from the company. They wanted to see more action. They want to learn more about what they can do. What can I do in my role? How can I integrate what I do to take positive action? Can I have more accessible tools and resources? Help me out. It's sort of help me to help the company is the message here, or help me to help the company help the world is the big message here. And this is a pretty consistent pattern across companies as well. So hopefully it just provides a little bit of a flavor of the type of thing that an evaluation phase can do. Once an organization has this type of insight about their employees, then it's really helpful to then to use that to inform a kind of action plan, not just for education, but for change as a whole. Because ultimately, change for an organization can't happen unless the people are changing. For the people to change, you sort of need to know where they're at today and be able to track if they're changing over time. And so on that sort of that 4-box transformation cycle you saw before, the thing I didn't mention is that obviously it goes back to evaluate again. So, you know, a year later or 18 months later, it's important if there's been initiatives to educate or initiatives to activate or to advocate, that you want to come back to that evaluation phase and say, well, has anything changed? Do people know more? Do they care more? Are they able to act more? And then you can see progress over time. And being able to get a benchmark to start off with, but then track and see what shifts year on year is critical if transformation is to happen for real.
And if there was one piece of advice that you would offer people who are here now or watching this later on, in terms of, okay, we haven't even really done the evaluation yet. We think we know this. We don't actually have any data behind it. Is there something that you would recommend people do as a follow-up action or start to get the ball rolling on this?
Well, I mean, I would say, before leaping to conclusions about what education should be done or what change program should be put in place, understand your employees first. I mean, obviously you can do that qualitatively through conversation quickly, but obviously only in a small sample. It's helpful to get a mixture of qualitative and quantitative understanding of where employees are at and what they want to do. And obviously, a tool like this can help. But yeah, I mean, I guess just like marketing and digital marketing, we talked about earlier, you start with your customer, you start with understanding the insight about the customer, and everything flows from there. Similarly, with any change program, start with the people who can create the change for you, which is your employees, and understand where they're at, and then based on that, then build a plan. So yeah, do a form of evaluation, whether it's something like this or something.
Start the dialogue. Yeah.
Start and understand where you're at, and then build the plan from there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. Are there any other questions from the group or anything else that you wanted Shuvo to dive a little bit more back into? Questions in Q&A or comments in chat? Always love to hear from you as well before we wrap things up. Hopefully some useful thoughts and some provocation, depending where you are on your sustainability journey currently. Any other closing thoughts from you, Shuvo, or anything else that you think is worth mentioning?
Well, I suppose I'd just bring it back to how we started, really, which is talking about this as a human challenge at the end, but also a really important one. And yeah, as we head into the next decade or two of business, and we think about what are some of the most important changes that businesses need to think about or look at, this has to be right up there, if not top of the list. It's certainly why I chose to make the leap from Google to Kite. It's an issue that really matters, and it's an issue that can have a huge impact on all of us. But also, I think, being able to take action on this, yes, it's a purposeful thing, and I think it will be fulfilling for those who work on this. But we've been talking a lot about how in the coming years we will find that every job is a sustainability job in one form or another, that it's not going to be the sustainability department. It affects everyone, and in that sense, I don't think it matters really if you have historically been involved in the green movement, or if you're an eco warrior or any of those types of things. I wasn't, but it's become clear that this is just something that will become intrinsic for all of us. And so it sort of, whatever the skill sets are that you or your employees bring, some of us are great problem solvers, some of us are great speakers or communicators, some of us are great leaders of people, or some people will be great analysts. Whatever skill set someone brings, there's a role for that skill set to drive this change. And most people, I find, are quite motivated about bringing the best of themselves to any challenge or problem. And if we can give almost every employee the chance to bring the best of themselves to arguably one of the most important challenges to solve for any business or for the industries that we're all part of, then I think that could be an incredibly fulfilling thing for every employee, while also solving one of the most important problems that we all must tackle. So I just encourage all of us to consider that and see how we can all help.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And it comes back to the comment you made earlier about purpose being a huge driver, particularly for Gen Z and as they move into the workforce, something that really aligns to them. Brilliant. Well, thank you, Shuvo, and thank you for everyone who managed to attend. Hopefully this was a useful session. I can see a few comments coming through there in the Q&A, appreciating the topics that we've covered. Obviously only just scratched the tip of the iceberg on what is a very, very big topic, but hopefully left you with a few questions that you can go away and perhaps some permission to start that conversation. So thank you, Shuvo, and thank you everyone who attended.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Thank you.